Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Attorney General Sessions. Um, just two opening questions. Over and over again in this committee and others, we have heard the intelligence and national security professionals of our country and people who study those issues professionally warn us that campaign and election interference by the Russians is not going away, that we can expect more of it in the 2018 election, that we can expect more of it in the 2020 election. What I would like to know from you is the name of a person in the Department of Justice whose job it is to look at that and make recommendations to the Senate as to what legislative remedies we should pursue to prevent that warned of activity from happening. Is there such a person, and what is his or her name?
Well, I think it would fall within our National Security Division, which is led by Dana Bente, who also was appointed U.S. Attorney by President Obama in Northern Virginia. I'll be frank, I don't know that we're doing a specific legislative review at this point.
Do you think it would be prudent to do
well,
it? We have been warned.
I take that as a suggestion, and I know that with your time in the Department of Justice, you could contribute to that discussion. So I'd be glad to discuss it with you.
Similarly, there is an executive order out of the White House regarding cybersecurity that is more or less a call for information from various cabinet departments. To my knowledge, there has been no proposed legislation of any kind. My conversations with Mr. Bossert at the White House have not produced any type of liaison or way of going forward on this issue. As you know, there are multiple congressional committees that touch on cybersecurity, and it really complicates life if there is not somebody at the Department of Justice whose job it is to work with us on cybersecurity legislation. And the silence has been deafening. If you could get me a name of a person whose responsibility is at the Department of Justice to work with the Senate on cybersecurity legislation, that I think would help move things forward.
I will do that, and because there are two levels of it. First, at any time, I hope that you would call our legislative affairs and say, I want to talk about legislation.
Well, secondly, the reason I can bring this up with you here right now is that we have a lot of trouble getting answers to anything out of the Department of Justice. I've got a list here of unanswered mail. January 30, 2017 letter, unanswered. February 17, 2017 letter, unanswered. March 7, 2017 letter, renewed September 15, 2017, unanswered. May 26, 2017 letter, unanswered, renewed July 27, 2017, unanswered. July 11, 2017 letter, renewed September 26th and October 17th, unanswered. September 26th letter, unanswered. So please don't refer me to the people who are supposed to be in charge of this relationship when they won't even answer my mail.
Well,
my
new director was just confirmed recently, and we've cut the backlog by half, and we're going to continue to cut that backlog, and we'll get on that. But I guess another thing, knowing that you are particularly knowledgeable about these complex issues, you would like to talk to an attorney who's actually working the cases and has dealt with the issues and more.
Yeah, I've been able to see the legislative shop, and so yeah, I'm up to speed on that side. The issue is there are things we need to fix legislatively on cybersecurity, and at the moment I can't find a point of entry into this administration of anybody who is working on cybersecurity legislation or is appointed to or delegated to. So that's the person that I need about legislation, not just an update on cases. I'm pretty familiar with that stuff. Okay?
I understand.
So, executive privilege. We talked about it a little bit. The reason I sent you the letter would be so that you'd be prepared to talk about executive privilege, and this wouldn't be a gotcha moment. But let me ask you if the November 4th, 1982 executive order by President Reagan is still the guideline under which the department operates, or have you changed that guideline?
That is a part of the principles that we operate under, yes.
It is the document that describes how the executive branch will respond to executive privilege, correct?
Well, it's that and case law and other executive documents that have been issued over the years.
So here's what let me know if any of this has changed. That rule says that executive privilege will be asserted only in the most compelling circumstances and shall not be invoked without specific presidential authorization. Is that still the rule?
Repeat that.
Executive privilege will be asserted only in the most compelling circumstances and shall not be invoked without specific presidential authorization.
Executive privilege cannot be invoked except by the president.
Congressional requests for information shall be complied with as promptly and as fully as possible, unless it is determined that compliance raises a substantial question of executive privilege. Is that still the rule?
That's a good rule.
The Attorney General has the authority to determine on his own that executive privilege shall not be invoked. You can make the decision not to invoke executive privilege yourself,
Well, Attorney General does not have the power to invoke it, period. Only the president can.
But you can determine that it shall not be invoked. You have the negative power to allow questions to be answered and documents to be released as not violating executive privilege. You can make that determination under paragraph 3, correct?
I'm not sure about that.
All right, well,
I don't think so.
okay, I'm reading aloud. So the department head, the attorney general, and the council of the president may, in the exercise of their discretion and circumstances, determine that executive privilege shall not be invoked and release the requested information. The attorney general says it right there.
Well, I don't believe they can do it without the approval of the president.
They can't release information. Of course, they have to be able to release information without the approval of the president. You do it all the time.
Well, I guess you're talking about core, but not about core privileges of the executive branch, such as private conversations between his top cabinet people.
Even for that, there's still this rule that the issue has to be presented to the president. You have a moment, what they call a request of the congressional body to hold this request for information in abeyance. You have a period of abeyance you're allowed to ask for under the executive order while you get the presidential determination if you're going to assert executive privilege. But sooner or later, the claim of executive privilege must be made with the specific approval of the president. And my concern is that this period of abeyance has turned into a non-assertion assertion of executive privilege. We have questions that we've asked you about going back to your Intelligence Committee appearance in June or July. I mean, how long a period of abeyance do you need to get the answer from the White House as to whether these questions are protected or not? You can't have a situation where the president never has to assert it and the abeyance goes on indefinitely. Don't you agree with that?
Well, I think you make a point, but the burden is on those who want to breach a core privilege of the president, which is private conversations with his attorney general, to show precisely what it is that you'd like him to waive it on. And that's what your letter failed in. It was sort of reversed.
Okay.
It said you have to tell us what you're going to do, want to talk about, and
for the record,
what you're not going to talk about. And I think it needs to
be. It was intended to refer to the questions as to which you had asserted a interim executive privilege. Okay. So we'll follow up on that, and we'll have more time.
But I did
specific questions asked of you in the Intelligence Committee. We'll pursue when I have more time. Attorney General Sessions, I'd like to pick up where we left off on this question of executive privilege. You've had a number of questioners since, so let me refresh your recollection. We were talking about the process under the Reagan 1982 order for the assertion of executive privilege, and your concluding remarks were about the importance that there actually be an executive privilege so that the president can have conversations with his immediate staff and cabinet members and so forth. And that is a principle that I think everyone in this room agrees to. There is an offsetting principle, which is that Congress has the power of oversight over the executive branch. And as best I can tell, where those two conflicting principles come together is in that 1982 Reagan order. And that I think you conceded that that is the prevailing order right now under which the Department of Justice is operating. So I go back to that order, which says that executive privilege shall not be invoked without specific presidential authorization. As we go on through the order, as we discussed, there's a provision that allows for a temporary, not even properly assertion of executive privilege. It's described as a request to the Congress to hold in abeyance their request for information while the executive branch makes the determination whether or not to assert executive privilege. So, and I get that. It makes perfect sense that there should be a period of abeyance, and whether it's a big document request that comes in and you need time to sort through it and determine what should be subject to executive privilege and what should not, or whether it's a live question from a requesting senator that may touch on executive privilege, and you've got to make that temporary assertion because you can't make that call necessarily from your chair at that moment. I get all of that. Here's my problem. I don't see any effort on the part of the administration to ever get a specific presidential authorization for the assertion of executive privilege as to anything. And there were some very specific questions that were asked of you in the Intelligence Committee. One by Senator Warner. To your knowledge, have any Department of Justice officials been involved with conversations about any possibility of presidential pardons about any of the individuals involved with the Russia investigation? And another from Senator Heinrich. asking if the president ever expressed his frustration to you regarding your decision to recuse yourself. Now, in both of those cases, I think you appropriately did not respond because of the abeyance period while you had a chance to sort out whether those were questions as to which the president wished to seek executive privilege. Right?
I think so. I think I understand.
But at some point, he's got to assert executive privilege. You can't just have that period of abeyance go into the indefinite future consistent with the executive order under which you are operating. Can you?
The way it's been done historically, as I understand it, is specific requests have been made. Various steps occur. If agreement is not reached, an accommodation process is supposed to occur, and see if this can't be fixed on some way outside of litigation. Often, most of these are documents. I'm unaware of the Supreme Court ever saying that Congress has the right to inquire of the president's private conversations between top cabinet officials.
It actually works the other way around, according to President Reagan, which is that Congress has the ability to inquire into absolutely anything, and that congressional requests for information are to be complied with as promptly and fully as possible, unless there is an assertion of executive privilege. The default is that you have to answer our questions. It's only when there is an assertion of executive privilege that default is no longer the case. And while there is a period of abeyance, what I'm worried about is that this administration is de facto rewriting Ronald Reagan's executive order about executive privilege so that the period of abeyance has no end to it. And Congress is stonewalled on information without ever getting an assertion of executive privilege, an assertion to which I believe we are entitled if we're going to be prevented from getting information.
Well, as you indicated, you have quite the ability to work your way through the complexities of this. I would say we're not at that point. I believe before you have an assertion of executive privilege by the president, he must know precisely what it is that he's being asked to provide, number one. And he also has a right to be informed as to why his privilege is of high value, why it should be waived in exchange for the request and the reason the request is made. And one thing I think you raised, or somebody did, Senator Whitehouse, I think I may have misunderstood. It is true that the Attorney General, by talking to the White House counsel, who is presumed to speak for the president, could agree to waive or not waive a request. But really, the White House counsel is considered, under those circumstances, to be an extension of the president. So I think...
Okay, fair enough. My time is up.